It's my great pleasure and honor to declare open the 80th regular session of the General Assembly and call to order its first plenary meeting.
Everyone says the UN is dying. Everyone says that nobody cares about the UN. And yet we have well over 100 prime ministers and presidents coming to New York, and they're going to use the UN as a space where they can both give public speeches about issues like Gaza, but also do a lot of business in the margins, often about the national priorities completely unrelated to the UN. So maybe this organization does still have some value as a global stage.
The UN was built by people who had no reason to be optimistic about the prospects for global cooperation, right? In fact, they had every reason for exactly the opposite. The architects of the UN system were looking back on a half century of total devastation, total warfare, and mass civilian death, right? Where nationalist doctrines and sort of fascist movements had produced the kinds of like rolling genocides that fundamentally remade the map of Europe into something ethnically homogenous. Those were not propitious circumstances in which to sit down and say, we can do something better.
8 years ago, the United Nations emerged from the ashes of war to pursue the cause of peace. That mission is the beating heart of our organization. But today, peace is under siege. Conflicts are multiplying. Civilians are suffering. Human rights and international law are being trampled.
This is sort of a perfect storm of financial pressure, great power, fractured politics, and real strain on the sort of systems that people depend on for humanitarian relief and food.
The UN is hamstrung by major power tensions that are blocking up the Security Council on many issues, while simultaneously facing a deep, deep financial hole, which is in large part due to US budget cuts. And these political and financial challenges are converging to make a very nasty situation indeed.
Thank you very much. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots. The future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor the differences that make each country special and unique.
There's no question that the situation in Gaza is going to be the dominant crisis under discussion in the UN General Assembly. And I think that what is happening in the Middle East will overshadow even the crisis in Ukraine and certainly other horrible situations like the civil war in Sudan. We are going to see France, the UK, and some other countries announcing that they will recognize a Palestinian state. Now that I think is really more about sending a long-term signal that there is somewhere in the future a diplomatic pathway to a two-state solution. In the short term, everyone will simply be calling for a ceasefire, getting food aid into Gaza, and obviously also the release of the remaining hostages. I don't think, however, that the US is going to listen, and I think that Israel may actually react quite sharply to other countries recognizing Palestine. You could well see Prime Minister Netanyahu escalating the situation, for example, by announcing even more settlement building in the West Bank.
The US is deeply isolated at the United Nations on this question, increasingly isolated in the run-up to this General Assembly by the fact that there will be a meeting on Palestinian statehood that is going to be spearheaded by a traditional ally of the United States. France and the UK are on board now. with recognizing Palestinian statehood, I would be very surprised if that didn't come up in his remarks, especially because the US has taken the unprecedented step of blocking Palestine's representatives.
We stand with the 89 countries who made clear at the Swiss Peace Summit that Ukraine's territorial integrity must be the basis of any just and lasting peace. Any process that does not recognize this will only be used as a pretext by Russia to regroup and come again. President, in this moment of deepening conflict, the world looks to this Council more than ever to provide leadership for peace, preserve our collective security, and protect the most vulnerable. The United Kingdom will always play its full part in fulfilling that responsibility. Thank you.
Now names are not Wilson, George, or Clemenceau, but Stettinius and Truman of the United States. And there's hope that history will not this time repeat itself, but will improve by the failures past. Weakness wounded the League of Nations, the conflict killed, but there is strength in the United Nations.
Seek to collapse the values, the systems and alliances that prevented conflict and tilted the world toward freedom since World War II. International criminal networks traffic drugs, weapons, people, forced dislocation and mass migration, threaten our borders, and new forms of aggression exploit technology to menace our citizens. To put it simply, we meet at a time of both immense promise and great peril. It is entirely up to us whether we lift the world to new heights or let it fall into a valley of disrepair. That the whole world is safer when nations are strong, independent of European recovery, is in full accord peace for themselves and for the world. Different values, different cultures, and different dreams not just coexist, but work side by side on the basis, let their people take ownership of the future sovereign nations, allow individuals to flourish in the fullness of the life intended by God.
Despite enormous progress, as people lose trust in institutions, governing becomes more difficult, and tensions between nations become more quick to surface. And so I believe that at this moment, we all face a choice. We can choose to press forward with a better model of cooperation and integration, or we can retreat into a world sharply divided and ultimately in conflict along age-old lines of nation and tribe and race and religion. I want to suggest to you today that we must go forward and not backward. I believe that as imperfect as they are, the principles of open markets and accountable governance, of democracy and human rights and international law that we have forged remain the firmest foundation for human progress in this century.